There are stories that are told loudly,
Children,
stories
come
meant to
inside now.
entertain,
It is
stories
getting dark.
meant to pass the time. And then there are stories that are told quietly, stories that are not announced, stories that are lowered into conversation like a warning, stories elders pause before finishing. This was one of those stories. In the village where it happened, children were taught many things early. They were taught how to greet elders properly. They were taught not to point at shrines. They were taught to return home before darkness settled fully. But there was one lesson that was never taught directly. It was learned. When evening came and the air began to cool, children learned to pay attention to smells. Because in that village, not every smell meant food. Some smells were invitations. And invitations after dusk were dangerous. The village itself was old. Not old in the way people count years, but old in the way paths remember footsteps. Old in the way trees lean toward the same direction they have leaned for generations. Old in the way silence feels familiar. No one could say when the first house was built. No one could say who founded it, but everyone knew the rules. When the sun began to lower, fires were reduced, children were called closer, voices softened, and names were never shouted into the dark. Because night did not belong to people. Night belonged to things that listened. At the edge of the village, where the red earth thinned and the forest pressed closer, stood a mud house. It was not the largest house, it was not the smallest, but it was the quietest. The woman who lived there had always been there. That was the strangest part. No one remembered her arriving. No one remembered her being born. No one could name her parents or grandparents. She did not speak of them. She did not speak of herself at all. When elders were young, she already looked the same way she looked now. When those elders became old, bent, and slow, her face did not change. Children grew up seeing her as she was. Their children saw her the same way. Time seemed to pass her by as though it had learned to avoid her. Some villagers said she was favored by unseen forces. Others said she was cursed and that the curse was quiet. But no one said she was ordinary. And in that village, anything that was not ordinary was watched carefully. She did not farm much. She did not attend gatherings often. But she was not isolated. People went to her, quietly. She made a local skincare cream. She never called it that. She never advertised it. She simply made it. Thick, dark, earthy, stored in small clay containers sealed tightly with cloth. The first woman who used it noticed her scars softening within days. Old marks faded. Skin that had grown tired seemed to remember itself. Word spread slowly, then faster. Soon, women began to fear missing even a single day. They would touch their faces often. They would stare into water longer than necessary. And when the cream finished, they returned, again and again. It did not stop with village women. Visitors began to arrive from far places, women who dressed well, women who arrived without servants, women who did not greet loudly. They came quietly and left before nightfall. They did not ask questions. They did not bargain. They paid, took the cream, and went. And none of them ever asked how it was made. Because some questions feel dangerous even before they are spoken. As time passed, something else began to happen. At dusk, smoke rose from the woman's compound. Not the kind of smoke that meant food for a family. This was different. She cooked a soup. Every evening, slow, patient, a soup she never ate. The pot sat on the fire long after others had finished cooking, and as darkness settled, the smell drifted outward, warm, familiar, like something remembered from a place of safety. Children noticed it first. They would pause mid-play. Their laughter would slow. Their feet would turn without instruction. Parents noticed too. Some would shout their children's names sharply. Some would pull them inside by the wrist. Some would close doors quickly. But not every evening was watched carefully, and not every child was caught in time. The first child disappeared on a calm night. There was no scream, no struggle. One moment the child was there. The next, they were not. The parents searched, neighbors joined, men carried torches into the forest. Nothing was found. The elders said it was unfortunate. Then it happened again and again, always children under the age of 7, always after the moon had risen, always quietly. No footprints leading away, no signs of force, just absence, and the smell of soup lingering longer than usual. Whispers began. Some said the woman was a witch. Others said she was chosen by forces that demanded payment. A few said the children were punished for disobedience. The elders listened and said nothing. Silence in that village did not mean ignorance. Silence meant fear had found its place. What the village did not know or refused to say out loud was that the woman did not chase the children. She did not drag them. She waited. She stood at her doorway when night settled fully. The soup simmered behind her. The smell did the rest. Children followed willingly. That was the secret. Youth taken without resistance lasts longer. And what she took from them was not just blood, it was time itself. This continued for years, until the night the wrong child followed the smell, and everything changed.
The child who changed everything was not born like other children. In the village, births were ordinary events. Women labored, midwives worked. Life continued. But this birth was remembered. The child's mother was a servant in the king's compound, not a wife, not a concubine, a servant who swept floors, fetched water, and slept close to the kitchens. She was quiet, unnoticed. When she became pregnant, no man claimed the child. No questions were asked. But the night the child was born, the village did not sleep. Earlier that evening, a messenger had arrived with bad news. The king's youngest son had died suddenly in his sleep. By the time mourning cloth was brought out and drums were lowered, the servant went into labor. The cries of birth mixed with the cries of death. And so the child was born while the village was still wrapped in mourning. In the old ways, this mattered. Children born during mourning were watched closely. They were believed to arrive while the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. Such children were said to carry two shadows, one that walked in daylight and one that did not belong fully to this world. The midwives noticed the child did not cry immediately. The baby opened its eyes first and stared, not wildly, not fearfully, but as though it was listening. The king was informed, not because the child was royal, but because the timing was troubling. The elders advised caution. The servant and her child were allowed to stay, but quietly. No celebration was held. The child was wrapped in mourning cloth instead of bright fabric, and a mark was placed on the child's wrist, not to curse, but to remind. A reminder that this child did not arrive alone. As the years passed, the child grew, quiet, observant. The child spoke less than others, watched more. When other children laughed, this one listened. When elders spoke, this one remembered. There were things the child noticed that others did not. The smell of soup at dusk, the way dogs refused to go near the forest at certain hours, the way some women avoided mirrors made of water, the way time seemed to move strangely around the woman at the forest's edge. By the time the child was 6, disappearances were no longer shocking. They were expected. Parents tightened their grip at dusk. Elders warned more sharply. But the woman's business continued. The cream still worked, and beauty, once tasted, is difficult to surrender. On the night it happened, the air was heavy. The moon rose early. The woman's soup simmered longer than usual. The smell traveled farther. The child noticed it immediately, not because it was inviting, but because it felt wrong. Still, something pulled. Feet moved without instruction. The path led toward the forest edge, toward her house. The woman was waiting. She always was. She stood at her doorway, firelight behind her, arms slightly open, still, patient. She did not speak. She never needed to. The child walked closer than any other had, closer than she expected, then stopped, right at the threshold. The fire inside her hut flickered strangely. The pot rattled without being touched. For the first time in years, something did not go according to her rhythm. The child looked up at her and spoke. Not loudly, not with fear. The child spoke her name, not the name the village used, a name that belonged to a time before the village, before the forest had grown thick. Her body reacted before her mind did. Her hands trembled. She reached for the child and hesitated. Whatever she tried did not work. The youth did not loosen. The offering did not open. The child did not step forward. For the first time in decades, the woman felt impatience, then fear. She tried again. The fire burned wrong. The soup thickened unnaturally. The smell faltered. And the child did not cry, did not scream, did not submit. At last, just before dawn, she pushed the child away. "Go," she said. Her voice cracked. The child turned and walked back toward the village, alone. At dawn, the village saw the child return, alive. That alone was enough to stop breath. The child walked slowly, clothes dusty, eyes wide, but not wild. People gathered without being called. Elders stepped forward. When asked what happened, the child said only one sentence. She said, "I was already counted." That sentence fell heavily. Elders understood immediately. They did not ask the child to explain further. They did not ask questions. They had heard enough. Because in the old ways, to be counted meant your name was already written among the dead, and such names could not be taken twice. The elders met that same morning, quietly. They spoke of old warnings, old suspicions, old silences. They spoke of children gone missing, of beauty bought too cheaply, of a woman who had lived too long without aging. And for the first time, they admitted what they had avoided saying for years. The village had waited too long. They agreed on one thing. They could not wait for nightfall. If they waited, she would vanish. She always did. So before the sun lowered, men were sent. Not shouting, not angry, just determined. They went to the edge of the forest, to the mud house that had watched generations pass. And for the first time, the woman did not disappear before they arrived. She was still there, waiting.
The men did not shout when they reached her compound. They did not accuse her loudly. They did not drag her out. They simply surrounded the house. The woman stood at her doorway as she always did at dusk. But this time, it was not dusk. The sun was still high. That alone unsettled her. For the first time in years, she was being confronted at the wrong hour. She looked at their faces and understood immediately. The village had finally spoken. They bound her hands with rope made from old fiber. She did not resist. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her calm unsettled them more than anger would have. As they led her toward the village square, people emerged slowly from their houses. Women stood with hands covering mouths. Men clenched their jaws. Some looked relieved. Some looked afraid. And some, those who had used the cream the longest, looked ashamed. In the village square, the elders waited. They did not ask her to explain herself. They did not ask her where she came from. They did not ask her how long she had lived, because explanations would not return the children. Instead, they spoke judgment, slowly, carefully. They named the disappearances. They named the nights. They named the smell of soup. And finally, they named the punishment: fire. The fire was built carefully, too carefully. Dry wood, old wood, the kind that burned hot and long. They tied her at the center. When the fire was lit, she screamed. Not quietly, not with dignity. She screamed like something cornered. Her skin burned. Her voice broke. The smell that rose from her body was wrong. Not like cooking flesh, not like death. Something older, something bitter. People stepped back. Children were pulled away. The fire burned and burned and burned, but she did not die. When the flames began to weaken, she was still alive, charred, crying, breathing. The fire gave up before she did. A silence fell over the square. The elders looked at one another. They understood. Fire was not meant to take her. So they chose the last punishment, the one reserved for things that refused to die. They dug a pit at the edge of the forest, deep, quiet. They did not sing, they did not pray, they did not speak her name. When they lowered her into the ground, she fought for the first time. She clawed, she begged, she screamed words no one recognized. They did not listen. They filled the pit. The earth closed over her. And then everything became still. The ground accepted her. That was the most frightening part. Afterwards, the village waited. Days passed, then weeks. The children stopped disappearing. The soup smell faded. Parents slept easier. But relief did not last. The cream stopped working. At first, women noticed small things: lines returning, skin tightening. Then the changes came quickly. Wrinkles deepened overnight, hair thinned, faces aged as if time was reclaiming what had been stolen. Some women cried. Some denied ever using the cream. Some went quietly to the burial site at night. They stood there saying nothing, waiting. Nothing answered them. The servant woman took her child and left the king's compound. No celebration was held for the child, no praise. The elders advised distance. Children born between worlds are not meant to be celebrated loudly. The child grew up, and never spoke that name again. Years passed. The village returned to its rhythms. Children played, fires burned, paths remained worn, but something had changed. At dusk, people became cautious sooner than before. And sometimes, not often, but enough, a smell drifted through the air, warm, familiar, comforting, even though no one was cooking. Dogs would whine, children would pause, elders would close their eyes, and doors would be shut quietly. No one ever dug her up. No one ever checked the pit. Some things are not meant to be confirmed, because some things do not end. They wait. And the earth, once it accepts something, does not always keep it forever.